Let's just start with the obvious. Your overall thoughts on this draft. We gave grades earlier. What's yours?
Yeah, I'm not big into letter grades 2 days after the draft, but I will say I left Haugh Saturday night with just kind of a shrug. It just Saturday in particular felt like a night or a day where a long day where none of the picks really gave you much of an adrenaline rush. It was just kind of some things that they did, and now you're going to have to see if you can develop those guys into contributors for your football team. My sense is that Thursday night they would have loved it had one of the offensive tackles fallen into their laps, in particular Will Campbell, which was probably a long shot, and then Calvin Banks, who went one pick before them. But they feel like they've got a weapon in Loveland that is really dynamic and is going to be fun to pair with both Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams. And then we can have that discussion about what that was in round two, whether their best case scenarios with the running back options got away from them and how they're going to manage now with another receiver added to a group of weapons that's going to challenge Ben Johnson in some different ways.
Let's talk about the running backs. Let's get right to it. They end up with the 21st drafted running back in the NFL draft. 21. I know it was a deep running back class, Dan, but as I've been trying to wrap my head around it, it wasn't that deep. What do you think happened there? Do you have a working theory?
Yeah, I do. And I asked Ryan Poles about this late Saturday night in saying that, look, it just felt like all weekend that running back board danced away from you. And is that just something that creates some human nature frustration? And he just sort of acknowledged that that's just part of being in a draft, and that it's going to be like that sometimes where the pockets don't line up. I think the Bears would have loved to make a huge splash on Thursday and made a trade to go get Ashton Genty. But when they had those conversations and considered the cost, it didn't feel worth it to them to blow out their top 3 draft picks to take one guy. You would have had to trade 10 and probably your 2 second-round guys to go up there, or 2 second-round picks to go up there above Vegas to get him. And then on day 2, I think there was serious interest in Travion Henderson, to the point that I think they were making phone calls and trying to get that lined up, and they just weren't able to get a deal done. And then he goes one pick before them to the New England Patriots. And so then you go into day 3 thinking like, okay, you're still picking at the top of round 4. Certainly they're going to get one here. And then 2 backs come off the board before they're on the clock, and they, in turn trade back really quickly, which leads you to believe that there was some interest in those 2 guys, particular Cam Scatterbo at the top of day 3. And so it's just one of those drafts where I think it got away from them. And Marshall, to your point, like when you have grand imaginations for the position and then you're drafting RB21 or RB22, whatever it turned out to be, I think there is a sense of deflation with that.
Yeah, and I mean, Kyle Manun, it's a 7th round pick, so that's always a wild card, even in making a football team. But I guess I don't know if this is good or bad for Roshan Johnson at this point, that they bring in another guy who seems to be similar in traits to somebody like Roshan Johnson, or could pull off the kind of stuff that he would. So do you think that this is a savior for somebody like Roshan Johnson, that the Bears did not get one of those guys that you just mentioned?
Grody, I would wait until the end of May to make that decision, because I wouldn't be surprised if they did some street free agent shopping with some of the veteran options that are out there to potentially add to that room and add some competition. Look, like I think there's a sense inside that building that Roshan Johnson's got more in him than he's been able to show the last few years, in particular last year, where he kind of got a role that maybe didn't, showcase everything that he has to offer. And so, this looked like Ben Johnson hasn't had a full practice with his football team yet. And so there's a lot for this new coaching staff to get their eyes on, evaluate, and then pivot in directions that they want to go. And so I think some things on that roster are going to be fluid over the next 6 weeks or so as they try to get themselves aligned properly for training camp.
From the butcher to street meat, that's where they went with the running back position.
Marshall the wordsmith. His headline writing at your service.
We could use them. Yeah, we need more headline writers at the Tribune, so just keep sending them in.
It's a real art form, in my opinion. I do want to also ask about this, Dan. They had, the Bears, we do know about some of the top 30 visits, for example, that they had. I can't believe we're getting this far into the minutia, which is really considering, Roshan's a 4th round pick, for example. We're talking about Kyle Monanga. He matters. He matters to us. But even SMU running back Brashard Smith reportedly brought him for a top 30. I think he talked about it on Kay Adams' show. Clearly somebody the Bears at least had on their radar to some extent. I'm wondering to what level did some of these people fall off their board before they were able to get to them? Was he considered possibly one of those guys?
It's hard to say what they gleaned from each of those 30 visits. 30 visits can be used for a lot of different things. And so until you have full intel from the organization itself on what they were looking to get out of it and what they did get out of it, it's hard to speculate. I just, I know that last week started with a grand imagination inside the building on what they could do in what was widely advertised to be one of the deepest classes of running backs in years. And they didn't get done what the best case scenarios were. And sometimes that's draft weekend, and you've got to pivot in new directions. The key in pivoting into new directions is making sure that the guys that you end up taking at other positions become difference makers for you, contributors for you, that they fit the vision of what you have for them. And so now they've got to do that. And you look, like these day 3 picks, you've got a really fast linebacker. Okay, well, let's see if he can earn a starting role going into the season, or at least a base defense role when you have 3 linebackers on the field. Okay, you've got a developmental corner out of UTSA. Okay, what is that going to look like? And what is Zach Frazier's profile look like 3 years from now? You've got to make some of these guys become impactful to your team. And if you don't, then the draft ends up being like so many Bears drafts of the past, where you look back on it and you go, man, a lot of misses and not enough hits.
Yeah, I think that's one of the issues that we're faced with when we try to evaluate. As you said, you don't like to give the letter grade. The letter I prefer to go with is I, because it is incomplete. No matter what we say, I said C+, but it is what it is. I'm looking at this overall, and we've kind of gone back and forth with, okay, is this a Ben Johnson draft? I've likened it after doing my thorough, review, and said it feels like a Ryan Poles draft that was gifted for Ben Johnson. I'm not calling it necessarily a Ben Johnson draft, but I feel like my biggest issue going with this right now is who's getting to the quarterback on this team. Who's getting to the quarterback? Dan, you tell me, who's getting to the quarterback? Because that's the question I've been asking since I moved to Chicago.
You're taking a leap of faith in Dayo Odengbo, who you paid a lot of money to be a quarterback disruptor. You're taking a leap of faith that your defensive coaching staff and Dennis Allen at the top can find a role for Austin Booker and develop him into what the Bears believed he could be when they drafted him a year ago. And obviously you need Montez Sweat to play like one of the most highly paid edge rushers in the National Football League. And then at the same time, we've heard for a while now about their desire to create pressure from the interior. And so Grady Jarrett's going to have to be part of that mix. You're going to have another step up from Gervon Dexter, who I think is probably the other defensive tackle starter in this particular system. And so, look, it's going to be by committee, and it's going to require all of the players that I just mentioned meeting expectations. And that's a big part of this, is you can't fall short of expectations. Otherwise, you fall short of expectations. And we're sitting here talking about a 10, 11, 12 loss football team because they didn't get what they wanted out of positions of need and players that they brought in to give them what they wanted.
And then the one guy I don't think you mentioned there, Dan, is a guy that we got to meet who, in terms of personality, definitely an interesting character. Shamar Turner, the defensive lineman out of Texas A&M. I don't know if it would be fair to say that you could just throw this guy into the rotation, because he did move from a defensive end spot, put on some weight, and now he's a tackle. But dude is ready. That's for sure.
His tape is fun.
His tape is fun, and his personality is more fun. I think for a late April review, like Grody, you would speak to this, that I think the energy that he had both on the Friday night Zoom call and then the in-person interview on Saturday was off the charts. And you were like, oh man, like you like to as reporters, you like to have guys like this inside the locker room, because on a dead Thursday, you can go in there, strike up a conversation, and you're going to leave probably laughing, a little more energized. Shamar Turner seems ready to roll. Now they've just got to figure out what that role looks like. Like I say, I think he'll be playing behind Grady Jarrett and Gervon Dexter, and they've got to figure out how he fits in Dennis Allen's defense, with this being a defense that wants to attack and wants to go forward. And so we'll see what that looks like. But certainly from a personality standpoint, from an energy standpoint, how many times over the weekend did we hear the word violent applied to Shamar Turner?
Right. He's got to tone some of that down, just a little bit of it. He needs to tone down.